Welcome to the Wisdom Circle. To subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast platforms, please visit us at www.thewisdomcircle.com.
Welcome, everybody, to the Wisdom Circle. I know some of you have been following us, and we appreciate it and say thank you. And some of you may be listening or hearing us for the first time, so welcome. I am Tony Ponturo, along with my friend of 48 years, Ray Warren. Ray, how are you today?
Doing well. I'm happy to be here.
I know I guess it's about 6 months we've been doing this. I think
Exactly.
we're learning things. Hopefully, those that are listening and watching are learning things as well. But I've learned a lot in this last 6 months.
Yeah, it's an eye opener in many ways. Just from both sides, we've had some colleagues, and then we've had some younger folks, and we've been able, I think, to share some stuff and pick up a lot. So it's exactly what I think when I talked for months. It's exactly what we thought about trying to do. So for those of our audience out there, we also ask you to feel free to tell your friends and family and share and all the things, because we haven't really gotten anybody saying anything bad yet, Tony. And it's a little bit of a gotcha society. So
Maybe we're too intimidating, but I'm just gonna underline that as well. I mean, you can go to our website, thewisdomcircle.com. We post a lot on LinkedIn, and so you can comment and say, hey, I don't know what you guys were talking about in that last podcast, but I don't agree. Or keep up the good work, but don't be afraid to tell us, because we want to make it better, and the only way we can make it better is if we get input from the customer. And it's funny, it sort of leads us in. So we've been talking in our last podcast, and probably there's been a theme throughout our podcast about the customer, the fan, the consumer side of business. And in sports particularly, I think a lot of people don't realize that you're really the underwriter of sports, and everyone needs to keep that in mind. So, recently you had something at the University of Tennessee, and we're not normally here to bash anyone. We're just stating facts and maybe an opinion. But the athletic director there, Danny White, decided to put a 10% surcharge on tickets to help pay for their NIL. And it's had a bit of a conversation. And here you have these fans, with 90,000 plus going to games, many of them probably middle class, using their hard-earned money. And now it's like, okay, you've paid, $100+ for a ticket, but now let's put another 10% on it. You think that's right, Ray?
No, I don't. I think, so I do want to go back for a second, though.
Yeah.
And for some of our audience, we take NIL as like ABC. It's like it's name, image, and likeness.
Good point.
Yeah. So pro players have been getting paid for that forever, if you want to use it. It's new to the college game and a lot more athletes. So they all can generate revenue. If a car dealer, a Burger King, or Target, or whoever want to use them in an ad or promotion. So it's a way to help athletes get compensated at the college level. There's been a giant lawsuit that went in favor of the athletes. And so there's a lot of commotion in the college sports business, the conference realignment, et cetera. So just table set. In order to pay off what are increased costs to the University of Tennessee, their athletic director has decided to pass that cost on to the fans. 91,000 people go to most Tennessee home games, and they are all going to pay 10% more in a world where everybody's complaining about inflation, the price of a loaf of bread, a gallon of gas, a banana. And I mean, the underlying theme to me is if you want a great team, you're going to have to pay for it. And fans are elastic, but at some point, they're going to snap. And, I think what'll happen is they're going to push the boundaries until they snap. What happens when Tennessee's, 4-6 or 0-3? So no, I don't think it's right. I don't think that it should all come down to let's just lay this off. People are paying for cable. They're paying for subscriptions to streaming apps, all the things you said, Tony. And it's, to me, it's figure out a way to do that without paying your head coach $27 million.
Well, exactly. And the broadcast fees and the right fees have gotten so big. It's, how is that ultimately distributed? I mean, these are hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think all of us, we're all fans, we're all customers of some product we buy. And I think we want to feel not taken advantage of. We want to feel appreciated. So if you reverse it out and said we're not going to pass that, let's say it's $100 ticket, so that's $10. We're not going to do that, and maybe people feel good and say, you know what, I'm going to have another hot dog at the game, or another beer, or another soda, or some popcorn, or whatever. Make people feel good that they spend the money anyway, but don't hold them up and say, we're taking advantage of you. And, we're expressing our opinion. It's like in Pat McAfee's show, it always says, we're expressing our opinion. It's not ESPN's opinion. Well, we're not ESPN, so we can say whatever we want, I guess.
Well, yes, we can. It is the wisdom circle, right? So, like, if we're the board, we're the both co-CEOs. Who's going to get mad at us other than people who might disagree? So, no, I think we are well protected to not worry too much about going on the other side of anything. It's I think it's just another look. I was sitting in a sports bar Saturday night having dinner. I remember way back when there were like the point spread for 22 college football games would be in the paper, and I would look at the 22 games and say, "Wow, like that's a lot of football." Now those 22 games are all on television in prime time. And some of them are, I don't want to mention any two schools because I don't want to offend anybody who went to one of them, but you might have Tennessee playing Georgia, and you might have a D2 school playing a D2 school, which is exciting to those fans who went there and less to the rest of the country. But, it's so much of a march to money. And at some point, I don't know. I'm not worried about sports rights. Our last guest a couple of weeks ago basically said, and I've said this too, the sports bubble will never break. I kept thinking it would when the NFL missed a partner and Fox came in. But I don't know. The fan might break. Sports rights might not break, but the fan might break.
Well, here's the other thing, and I know we want to get to another topic too before we bring on our guest, is, Florida State paid Memphis $1.5 million to come play a game in their stadium. Now, if you're Memphis and you're trying to build your program, and which has been pretty good over the last 5 years or so, you really have to pay them $1.5 million to come go under your schedule. I mean, and that's just one example. So people are paying, schools are paying money to get a team to go on their schedule and play a game in their stadium. Now, maybe the argument is, well, that's sharing in the profit of the game on their site, and that's probably a good argument. But, before we start hitting the fan one more time, maybe there's a better way to reallocate your resources.
Yeah. Right. Notre Dame brought a team in and lost.
Yeah. Northern Illinois. Yeah. Who's now ranked, 23 in the country. The other topic, and that I think this bothers me a little bit more than you, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is sort of the recognition in business, and particularly in the sports media business. And we're all good friends with the people as SBJ. And listen, I was on some of their top, powerful people, blah, blah, blah. But this recognition of the 40 under 40, which sort of was okay. But then they went to 30 under 30. And so now you're telling this whole industry that's 26, 28, they're under 30 years old, that we've picked out these 30 people who are barely getting their feet wet in the business, that you're the cream of the crop. Is that really right? What does that do to the other people? Like, am I already a loser at 28 years old because I'm not 30 under 30? And you and I were talking about a title once that said Rising Stars, and it's like, are we really stars? Or are we just trying to do the work, And at the end of the day, it's about growing sales, growing market share, and that should be the reward. But I think people are getting recognized, and no one really knows if they've actually impacted the business that they're in. So that's the statement. What do you think?
Yeah, I would love to disagree, but because, conflict can be good, and we share different opinions very well together. But I don't. I think 40 under 40 is good. I mean, I it's all about selling tables, and so I'm wondering how successful it is. I mean, I don't get invited to the 30 under 30, never did. And I totally agree. I worry about the other people in the business who aren't 30, and how the hell do you really know? Because so many people make the turn at 34 or 37 or 41. I mean, they make the turn, meaning they get it, they hit their stride. People are different, they have different lives, different things to deal with. And I just think it's another one of those everybody gets a trophy moments. Let's make 30-year-olds be a part of this elite group. Really? So I love the guys at SBJ. They're very nice, and we've all had a lot of fun with them. But I think it's a bad idea.
Yeah, I mean, I heard back, I was going back 15 years ago that, and I won't name them but well-known people, powerful people would what's the word I'm looking for? Leverage themselves, argue with SBJ to get on the list. And so, so is that really right? I mean,
No.
so it has to be political all the way down the line. Do the judges really know everybody and what their impact is? Not taking away those who got that recognition, but I get concerned about those that all of a sudden feel they're in economy class, not first class, because of this recognition. And and I'm sure our guest will have some opinion of this as well, because
Yeah, it's interesting when something's that crystal clear. We can't talk about it for too long, because it's like, oh, we can, but it's like, yep, not a good idea.
Yeah. So with that, I think it's a good setup. We both have worked with this gentleman, Steve Margosian, probably about equal time. Steve and I worked at Anheuser-Busch together for about 12 years. Steve ran our New York office, so negotiating with all the broadcasters with our media deals. And then he went on to Comcast to ultimately be the SVP of, I think it's called Creative Marketing Sponsorships. He'll articulate it better, but really to go to sponsors and say, here's all of our assets at Comcast. Let us put together a deal with you. But I always kid him. He's sort of a informal historian of the business, the media business, the people side of the business. He's now sort of retired from the business just recently, but I know he's going to be continuing to bring his perspective, maybe in the classroom at the university level and other things. So, so with that, let's bring on Steve Margosian. Steve Margosian, welcome. You're now in the Wisdom Circle. How does it feel?
I feel very wise being in the wisdom circle.
Are you ready to impart some wisdom?
Yeah, I've accumulated a little bit over the course of my career. I would say not as much as you two fellas, but I've got something to add. So let's kick it off. Tell me.
Yeah, absolutely. So real quick, I obviously gave you a little introduction. Anything you want to add about your background that I didn't add, like you're a loyal Wake Forest grad or something like that?
Yeah. No, I would suggest that I've been extremely fortunate in my career to what I call have all 3 points of the triangle. I was 9 years, almost 10 years, an agency buyer, and then 11 years on the client side in a very unique way, being the client at Anheuser-Busch, still buying national media and being engaged in that game and that process, but really understanding how a marketer takes a brand into the marketplace at a level that no agency buyer ever gets the opportunity to see. So I really consider myself a client. I was the client, and I knew the business really, really well. And I had my specialty within the organization, which was negotiating national television time for the brand. So that was kind of interesting. And then I took the third piece of the triangle is I went into sales. While not a line sales guy like you were, Ray, at ABC, but I was, in lockstep with big sales organizations and eventually the NBC Sports Group when Seth was running it. Seth Winter, a longtime friend of both of yours, but he had oversight of the group, and then Dan. But I was their marketing guy. I was their ad sales marketing person who ran a parallel path to the guys who were on the front lines actually doing the transactional part of the business. But I was right there trying to help them along the way by creating ideas and marketing platforms that would turn $1 into $2 and get a premium for that money. So I was really lucky, having all three parts of it, agency, client, and sales. And I would suggest that there are not too many like me, without being braggadocio. It's really a unique point of view that I think I was able to accumulate over the course of my career. I'm not sure that a lot of guys have all three of those on their
You
resume.
created your own wisdom circle,
Yeah, I did.
your own circle of wisdom.
I did.
Well, Ray, you sort of have two of those three, if not close to. What question do you have for Steve that may be reflective of that? I mean, what that perspective is unique, having both being on both sides.
Yeah, it is for sure. So the one thing I remember, the term that people use around the work Steve did was he kind of was our secret. He would make our secret sauce. Like when Steve would sit and look at some opportunity, he would be very creative and just give it an advantage for the NBC seller over the other guys. It just wasn't, because there's so many moving parts at NBC after we were all together. And Steve was so open to it all. I was always a big fan of Steve's and what he did. I think I hear the client part, and I kind of wish I was never inside the belly of the beast, and I don't know how much time I would have wanted or needed there, but I think it would have been good. I mean, once you get to a level like at Caro, I was running the place, so you get pretty deep into the strategy, but you don't get into the day-to-day things you've talked about, Tony and Steve. So, yeah, I think it is an absolute differentiator for Steve in the marketplace that he might ever find himself in again, or is in right now, consulting or talking to other people. That's a great.
You know what I'd say, Ray, that and Tony, this will resonate with you. One of the things I always found fascinating working for the brewery was, you go to October plans where the entire organization would sit in a room and literally lay out the plan for the upcoming year in front of the most senior management in the organization. And the thing that always struck me was there were, I believe at the time, there were 12 guys that sat behind August Bush the third and the fourth. And they were the sales leads. They were the regional sales guys who had their hand on the pulse of the price of beer and what they could get for that in terms of an increase in price, or where the price wars were against the competitors. And that kind of insight to the actual business of the business of how the beer is being marketed and priced and what the margins are going to be was something that nobody on an agency side, and quite frankly, even on the selling side, ever gets exposed to that. Or you'd be we'd be in these odd conversations where they'd be talking about the price of paper, right? And like, well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, it's because they need to put the 12 packs together, and that's cardboard and that's paper, or the labels, or the price of glass was going up or going down, whatever. And that impacted everything that was happening for the company. And we had a line of sight into that as on the client side that I really, I think was very important in how I approached the remainder of my career, understanding that there are things in play that are way beyond the transactional nature of rating points, right? And the marketplace, which will always be the supply and demand. I mean, it's very fundamental. Our business, in many respects, is simple when it boils down to supply and demand. How much money is chasing how many rating points? But when you get inside on that, a look like that into a company, I think you learn so much, and it becomes so valuable at some point. At some point in your career, you can use that information you've learned to just understand. Even if I'm sitting in a meeting at the time with an automaker who sometimes they'd explain what their problems were. I'd sit there and go, yeah, I get it. I understand. Or you'd be in there with P&G and they talk to you about, a new rollout or a line extension that has these challenges because, whatever the reason may be, you'd sit there and you go, yeah, I think I understand that. If you were a transactional buyer and seller, all you're worried about is making budget, right? And figuring out how to get the money from the client and the agency, and you don't really have time to understand or learn the full magnitude of the business. So that's what I would say about that level of experience there.
Sort of a question to both of you is, I felt back in the day that when the network sales departments went to more of a commission-based program, because it wasn't that way all the time, it sort of stopped the collaboration of day parts and people working together because it was sort of became siloed. It's like and it was like, we need to hit our number to what you said. So we're not going to discount late night because we need to get our money, even though if you discount late night a little bit for us, we may pay more with prime or more with sports. It sort of lost its collaboration a little bit.
Right.
Yeah. So I honestly missed that part of the business. Don't miss it. I wasn't there when that model turned. I think what happened that over time, using the straight salary and a bonus, there were all these other places showing up where they weren't necessarily paying more cash, but the opportunity to earn was much greater. And they were losing people. It might have been around the internet bubble, Steve. You might remember that. I was at Raycom or Cara or I don't know. But I left ABC in '88, never went back to network sales in the rest of my career. So, but I think it was just pressure on keeping good, retention issue. Steve, I don't know what your thoughts are.
Tony, I think it's an interesting observation because I believe that the business has gone through a number of transformations with that kind of mindset, which is, if you recall, when Mel Karmazin got to CBS, his whole business plan was, I'm going to link everything together and I'm going to try to go to market with all my assets, and all those silos need to be broken down. And then Turner had a group, one of the first groups called Turner Turner Solutions, Client Solutions, or something to that effect, where they would try to go to market with everything. ABC had something called Full Circle, was there kind of bringing everything together. NBC's tried that. And what you find is those silos are very, very hard to break down. No matter how strong a leader you have, whether it was Mel Karmazin or in my world, it was Linda Yaccarino, who ran NBC for all those years, breaking down silos within those organizations was so hard because everybody was worried about their own bottom line and their own budget. And to try and incent them to think as one company sounded great. And it was really great to tell the Wall Street analysts that this was going to be our approach. And look at all our assets and we know it's going to work. But when it got down to the day-to-day business of trying to do what you said, Tony, leverage, a late night money to get a better deal in sports or something, even getting deeper than that, to say, we're spending so much money on your owned and operateds, right? That's got to count to the totality of your business, right? And the network guys would look at you like you had three heads. Like, no, not it doesn't. And
that's another company in their mind.
Right. And then you'd look at them and say, but your management is saying that you want to approach the marketplace as one, with one message, and all you people working together to make it, you remember this one, guys, easier for the client. All those things were put together to make it easier for the client to work. But they didn't want to, they ultimately didn't really want to work together.
No, they didn't close the circle.
No, and I'm sure that, and we could all point to in our careers to plenty of times where it did work, right? Where we did business in totality and we're able to leverage things and it worked out for everybody, which was always the goal. But the dynamic of the kumbaya on every deal, every day, in that sales organization, forget it. They were never going to look that way. Ray, I see you smiling because I know you know.
Yeah, yeah. It is. That's the wrong industry to try to sing kumbaya.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the wrong business.
Yeah.
So it was a nice model applied to the wrong industry.
Yeah.
You're not going to get a bunch of salesmen who want to, or women who want to kill each other to get the inventory, make the deal, give up a nickel to help it. Yeah, it's kind of laughable, and it had to be done. Again, I was not in the business when that went into effect. It had to be done by a bunch of guys with an Excel spreadsheet. That was not done in the room with the people who have to go out on the street and make a living.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think that's right. Yeah, sure.
So, speaking of working together, we talked a lot about the Olympics, a couple of podcasts with Dan Lovinger, and I know you had some not strong opinions, but observations of the Olympics at NBC. So why don't you put a little cherry on top of that conversation and give us your perspective?
Yeah, I listened to Dan's pieces, and he was spot on every observation. I was thinking along similar lines, and it really plays to the overall success of NBC during those 2 weeks. It was just, a remarkable achievement for them. They brought the games back online to where they should be, pointed in the right direction. We've talked about the 3 Pacific Rim games in a row really not helping the movement, and yet so much was riding on Paris and the success of Paris going forward. And they knocked it out of the park in every way, shape, and form. But here's what I think for the audience that might be interesting. I'm going to take us down a path of sponsorship. So what I found fascinating was how hard the advertising community leaned into the intellectual property that they had bought, and I will in terms of the rights, and also extending that to athletes, and the athletes in their own way are intellectual property, and negotiating personal services agreements with the athletes. And so you have Toyota and Comcast and Procter and Gamble and Visa and Delta doing more work to try and leverage those rights than I think we'd ever seen before. If you consider it, every commercial had athletes in it. And here I think is a really interesting part. They were so invested that they had multiple executions with multiple athletes that they were able to roll out over the course of the 2 weeks. And I would suggest that with all those big guys spending tons of money, I didn't feel 1 ounce of wear out on any of those commercials. They all seem fresh. They all seem new. We've also been in environments where the games are under delivering, and all of a sudden you got to keep putting in make good weight. And now these commercials are wearing out. They didn't wear out at all. So here's where I'm going with that. Every organization like that needs what's called an ad sales marketing group, what I did for a living at NBC. And that angle of creating a group within your organization that runs a parallel path to the sales team, I think is a very underappreciated and a place of opportunity for young people that they may not know about. What those groups do is they are the conduit between the client and sometimes the agency, but in the Olympics with this kind of money, it's usually the client directly, and production, right? And so they need to make all of the magic on how, when Sha'Carri Richardson is running in the 100, right? And right before she runs, there are 2 commercials that have her in them. And that ad sales marketing group has worked very hard on a number of levels. They have worked with production and all the research people in the Olympics to communicate back to whoever the client may be. I can't recall. She might have been sponsored by either L'Oreal or I can't exactly remember the client. But my point is, they were giving the information to the client that here's an athlete that you really need to get on, because here's what we're going to be doing with her. She's going to be running the 100 in prime time at this point in time. We can set it up where you'll run your creative right before. And you know what? If she wins, we'll you can create a what they call a salute ad, and we can run that in the primetime telecast later that night, right? Because it was the afternoon was live, primetime was packaged. we'll run that salute ad if she wins gold. So that coordination on all of those elements and all of the marketing things that you saw happen is done by an ad sales marketing group that is really binding together all that activity that you saw in the Paris Olympics. So that was my group. It's run by a fellow named Charlie Saunders now. He literally is connected to Dan Lovinger's hip at every moment to make sure that all of those elements and those sponsors are taken care of in a very intricate and complicated matrix of where those ads are going to run, how they should run, queuing it up with production. So I bring all that up, to shine a light on the sponsorship and how people in the business are no longer putting the rights in the drawer. And we all remember that. Nobody does that anymore. Why would you spend the money if you're gonna just closet those rights? But I say it because that's a part of our business that I think young people probably don't know exists.
Does everybody have one of those?
Yeah, everybody does. Everybody does. Some more robust than others. So right. ESPN has an army of people who do that for Sean Hanrahan. I mean, just literally people, an enormous group. My group was pretty big. We were 35 people, at some point across all of the sports, whether it was my Olympic group or the golf team down in Orlando at the time, or the NFL people, or the people working on the Premier League, the NHL at the time. So right. they're big groups. Fox had one, maybe not as robust, but they had one. And CBS was probably the one that was a little bit further behind on that. They had a group for sure, and they still do. I'm not sure that they were as active and as willing. Who had a really good group was Turner Broadcasting. They were always, and it's interesting.
Yeah, they started that.
Yeah, first. Long time. Really? Long
first,
time.
Way back?
Yeah. Because they were cable, and they had to work harder.
Exactly.
Even though it was sports, it was viewed from a different lens because it wasn't big legacy broadcast, bigger rating points. It was cable, so they had to create more opportunities, more marketing opportunities, make themselves more available to the official sponsors, and they did it at a very early stage. And they were very good. They're actually quite.
I think they knocked down a wall that wound up getting knocked down at the networks because the network guys would go crying back to their boss and say, well, yeah, but, they're putting interstitial programming in between. They're giving them features. And not just in sports, in everything.
In everything, yep.
And I think the networks had to they knew they were kind of having their lunch eaten by cable, like little nibbles. It wasn't giant inhaling. And that they had to address it.
I think you're absolutely right. And it wasn't easy because the production people at the legacy networks, they're trying to win sports Emmys. And their point of view was the sponsor will fit in where I tell you they fit in. And that was the way it was done for a very long time. And then then the dynamic turned when the money became important, that the salespeople were saying, if you don't do it, we are going to lose this money because another group might be willing to do it, whether it was Fox or ESPN or what have you. If they're willing to do it, we're going to lose the money. And then all of a sudden, the most senior management at every organization would weigh in and say to production, forget the Emmy, get the money, right? It became a very different paradigm for the production people to have to deal with. And it all ultimately worked out. And everybody does it differently.
Or they changed production people.
Yeah, that's true.
Dennis Swanson became the president of ABC Sports because he got that. Whereas Roone Arledge would get mad if we wanted to put a Titleist billboard across a fairway at the U.S. Open.
Oh, yeah.
I'm doing a beauty shot right now with like the fourth fairway. It's the most beautiful fairway in America. You're not putting a logo there. Yeah. Okay, great. So, I've come a long way.
And it kind of goes back to it's the money. It's the money, right?
And the data, right? Because Dan's talking about selling, instead of women 18 to 49, women with 3 kids who have a car lease that's up in 6 months.
Yeah.
I mean,
for sure.
Part 2 of this podcast will be available next week. For more information, please visit us at www.thewisdomcircle.com. Thank you.